Neurodivergence is a term used to describe differences in the way people's brains work. It includes variations in attention, learning, mood, social understanding, and sensory processing that differ from what's considered neurotypical. People who are neurodivergent may have conditions such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's syndrome, and OCD. Neurodivergence isn't a disorder in itself. It's a concept that embraces cognitive diversity. Being an INFJ does not automatically equate to neurodivergence in a clinical sense, but many INFJs report experiencing life in ways that parallel traits commonly found in neurodivergent individuals. INFJs perceive the world through abstract patterns and deeply internalized frameworks of meaning. For many, this way of processing the world does not align with the linear, detail-oriented, and present-focused approach that mainstream education and societal systems often reward. INFJs may struggle in environments that prioritize surface-level engagement or demand rapid, externalized thinking. Their insights can seem disjointed or out of nowhere to others, though internally they are following a complex thread of connections. This kind of cognition can resemble the different wiring often attributed to neurodivergence in individuals with autism or ADHD, where the mode of processing information deviates significantly from neurotypical norms. INFJs are highly empathetic and can often sense what others are feeling, sometimes to the point of being overwhelmed by the emotional currents in a room. This heightened sensitivity can result in social fatigue, overstimulation, and a profound need for solitude to recalibrate. Experiences frequently reported by neurodivergent individuals. INFJs may find social norms perplexing or even inauthentic, which can alienate them from peers and create a sense of being fundamentally different. Their preference for meaningful, one-on-one conversations over casual or group interactions can also position them outside the norm, particularly in extroverted, fast-paced social settings. The INFJ's internal world is often rich, complex, and deeply imaginative. They may spend large amounts of time in thought, envisioning ideal futures, alternate realities, or philosophical constructs. This tendency can lead to difficulty staying present or engaging in practical, everyday tasks, a common challenge among neurodivergent people. Their idealism and perfectionism can also set them at odds with societal expectations or create internal stress when their ideals don't align with real-world limitations. These inner conflicts, along with a strong moral compass and an intense focus on meaning and purpose, often isolate INFJs from their peers, mirroring the isolation many neurodivergent individuals experience. Check out our newly released INFJ Mastery course and INFJ ebook. The links are in the description of this video. In educational or workplace environments, INFJs may be misunderstood or underutilized. Their unique strengths, such as visionary thinking, deep empathy, and an ability to see connections that others miss, can go unrecognized in systems that favor extroversion, quick decision-making, or conventional logic. This mismatch can lead to feelings of invisibility or frustration, and in some cases, may result in misdiagnosis or the INFJ masking their true selves in order to blend in. The act of masking, a behavior commonly reported among autistic individuals, is similarly employed by INFJs who feel pressured to adapt to a world that does not accommodate their cognitive or emotional rhythms. Many INFJs exhibit strong sensory sensitivities, light, sound, touch, which may further reinforce the sense of being misaligned with neurotypical expectations. These sensitivities, coupled with a tendency toward anxiety or existential rumination, can make ordinary environments or tasks overwhelming. While not every INFJ will meet the clinical criteria for a neurodevelopmental condition, the constellation of traits they embody, unconventional thinking, emotional intensity, sensory sensitivity, and social dissonance, often places them on the periphery of what society considers normal. INFJs live primarily through their intuition, often perceiving subtle shifts in atmosphere, unsaid emotional undercurrents, and long-range consequences of present actions. Their intuitive insights often arrive fully formed, not through step-by-step logical analysis, but via a nonlinear, unconscious synthesis of disparate inputs. This experience can feel alien to those grounded in more concrete or externally validated ways of knowing. INFJs may struggle to articulate how they arrived at a conclusion because their thinking process is internalized, symbolic, and often difficult to translate into words. This disconnect between inner cognition and external communication is something frequently reported by neurodivergent individuals, especially those who experience their thought processes as nonverbal, image-based, or layered. Emotionally, INFJs are not only attuned to others, they are deeply affected by the emotional tone of their environment. This hypersensitivity to emotional stimuli can mirror traits found in highly sensitive persons, which some researchers and communities place under the broader umbrella of neurodivergence. INFJs often feel emotions intensely and require solitude to process them. What others brush off as trivial, INFJs may dwell on for days, analyzing every nuance, implication, and lesson. This profound emotional processing can be a double-edged sword, a source of insight and empathy, but also a pathway to emotional exhaustion, anxiety, and emotional overload. INFJs also often demonstrate a kind of social dysphoria, a sense of not fitting into the social scripts and rhythms expected in daily interactions. They may feel out of sync with others, not because they lack social skills, but because the nature of most social exchanges feels performative, superficial, or energetically taxing. Their preference for deep, meaningful interaction over small talk can create a persistent sense of alienation, especially in environments where social success is measured by charisma, speed of response, or group dynamics. They often feel the need to play a role or wear a mask to fit in, something that aligns closely with the concept of social camouflaging, a well-documented behavior among autistic individuals and other neurodivergent populations. This camouflaging can come at a psychological cost, contributing to burnout, identity confusion, or even depression. Another factor that contributes to the INFJ's neurodivergence is their inner moral and philosophical world, which often develops early and operates as a guiding compass. INFJs tend to seek a coherent, meaningful narrative in everything: relationships, careers, social structures. Their need to reconcile their inner ideals with the external world can become an obsession. This trait echoes certain cognitive patterns seen in conditions like OCD, where intrusive thoughts or a need for order and meaning take center stage. INFJs don't necessarily suffer from OCD, but their intense desire for moral coherence, alignment with values, and existential clarity places them in constant tension with the world's ambiguity and chaos. This intensity of inner life and fixation on meaning can sometimes make the INFJ experience lonely and isolating, especially when they cannot find kindred spirits or structures that support their depth. On a societal level, INFJs tend to question dominant narratives. They often feel a quiet discontent with societal systems that seem unjust, illogical, or exploitative. Rather than adapting passively, they are often drawn to activism, healing professions, or creative paths where they can express their vision for a better world. This tendency to step outside mainstream thought and push for transformation, spiritual, emotional, or systemic, places them again at the periphery, not because they cannot conform, but because conformity feels like a betrayal of their essence. This kind of boundary-pushing thinking, deeply independent, nonconformist, internally consistent but externally strange, is a hallmark of many neurodivergent minds. In personal relationships, INFJs may struggle with being misunderstood. They may feel like they are too much or too intense, not because they are, but because their depth requires a level of reciprocity and authenticity that many people are not prepared to offer. This mismatch can lead INFJs to isolate or limit their connections to a few deeply trusted individuals. They often crave soul-level intimacy, but fear vulnerability, especially if early experiences taught them that their emotional needs were too big or unwelcome. This paradox of yearning and retreat is another deeply neurodivergent experience: to long for connection, yet to feel safer at a distance. To say that INFJs are neurodivergent is not to suggest they are disordered, broken, or deficient. Rather, It is to recognize that their way of thinking, feeling, and being often falls outside conventional frameworks of normalcy. From an early age, INFJs often feel different, not in an egotistical or attention-seeking way, but in a quiet, observational sense. They may notice that what captures their attention, what stimulates their imagination, or what disturbs them deeply is rarely shared by others in their environment. While peers are concerned with immediate gratification or social status, INFJs are often preoccupied with meaning, authenticity, ethics, or patterns behind behavior. This divergence in priorities creates an internalized sense of alienation that, over time, becomes part of their identity. They don't just feel different, they feel like they were born looking at life sideways. This sense of difference aligns with the lived experiences of many neurodivergent individuals, who often report a similar lifelong feeling of disconnection or otherness. Another important aspect to look at is the INFJ's relationship with time. INFJs often experience time in a nonlinear way. Their dominant function, introverted intuition, allows them to intuitively leap into the future, sense long-term consequences, or recall the past through a lens shaped by symbolism and emotional significance. This temporal fluidity can make it difficult for them to remain grounded in the present moment, and they may struggle with executive functioning in practical life. Tasks that require sustained focus on mundane details, paperwork, routine chores, financial planning, can feel like an enormous drain on their cognitive energy. They are often described as dreamy or out of touch, but this misrepresents what's actually happening. Their mental resources are invested in a different cognitive plane, one concerned with the unseen, the potential, the emergent. This disjunction between where their mind naturally goes and where society demands it should be is a subtle but powerful source of tension, and one that mirrors the cognitive friction reported by individuals with ADHD or those on the autism spectrum. Sensory processing can also play a role in the INFJ's divergence from a norm. Many INFJs report being particularly reactive to certain stimuli such as bright lights, chaotic environments, abrasive sounds, or even the emotional vibe of space. This kind of environmental sensitivity is not simply a preference for quiet. It reflects a nervous system that is highly attuned to both the tangible and intangible layers of experience. This sensitivity often leads INFJs to seek solitude not just for recharging, but because overstimulation can trigger anxiety, dissociation, or cognitive shutdown. In social or workplace environments that are noisy, fast-paced, or emotionally dissonant, INFJs may appear withdrawn, aloof, or non-functional, not because they are disengaged, but because their system is overloaded. Again, this pattern resonates strongly with many forms of neurodivergence, particularly sensory processing disorder and traits associated with autism spectrum conditions. While often perceived as people persons due to their warmth and insight, INFJs don't actually thrive in most social settings. Their empathy is not casual, it is immersive. They can absorb emotions, mirror pain, and feel the moods of others in their own bodies. This form of effective empathy can become overwhelming, especially when INFJs are in environments where emotions are raw, suppressed, or contradictory. Rather than energizing them, social encounters often drain them. They may retreat after even short interactions, needing time to decompress and return to themselves. This experience blurs the lines between emotional intelligence and emotional hypersensitivity. It speaks to a neurotype that is tuned so finely to social input that the world often becomes a barrage of emotional static rather than a manageable stream of interactions. When INFJs attempt to explain their worldview or their feelings, they often run into the limits of language. Their internal landscapes are so layered and symbolic that they find typical conversational formats insufficient. Words feel flat or inadequate to capture the textures of their perception. As a result, many INFJs are drawn to creative expression, writing, art, music, even metaphorical or spiritual language, as a way to approximate what they know internally but cannot convey directly. This linguistic frustration, too, is familiar in neurodivergent circles. Individuals with autism, for example, often describe struggling to bridge the gap between their internal experience and the expectations of verbal communication. For INFJs, this gap may be less about literal language dysfunction and more about a disconnect between the depth of their awareness and the shallowness of conventional expression. INFJs often internalize the idea that they must contort themselves to be understood. They learn to filter their insights, soften their emotional reactions, and delay their intuitive conclusions in order to make others comfortable. They may even begin to distrust their own perceptions if others don't validate them. Over time, this can erode self-trust and lead to chronic self-monitoring, another hallmark of camouflaging behavior seen in neurodivergent individuals. INFJs may appear to function well on the outside, maintaining jobs or relationships, but inwardly they feel like they're always compensating, always trying to recalibrate who they are in order to be seen as acceptable. The emotional and cognitive labor required to maintain this dual identity can lead to burnout, depression, or dissociation, outcomes frequently experienced by neurodivergent people forced to live under neurotypical expectations. INFJs perceive meaning in everything, where a neurotypical individual might observe a situation for what it outwardly presents. The INFJ is wired to ask, what's beneath this? What is this situation trying to reveal? What is the emotional subtext? They are rarely content with appearances. Their intuition is not simply about guessing future events. It is a deep, automatic sense that everything is part of a larger pattern or hidden structure. This compulsion toward pattern recognition, especially emotional and psychological patterns, often leads them to feel as though they are carrying more information than they know how to process. The world doesn't just happen around them. It happens through them, as if they are an instrument being played by the vibrations of collective emotion, archetypal movement, and moral undercurrents. Many INFJs report intense internal noise, not in the sensory sense, but in the sense of conflicting intuitions, moral dilemmas, or obsessive loops of analysis. While the outside world sees someone calm and composed, the interior of the INFJ can feel more like a quiet storm, heavy with concern, nuance, and the weight of unspoken truth. This inner noise is often indistinguishable from the kind of cognitive dissonance and emotional overwhelm seen in those with high-functioning autism or highly sensitive individuals who process every social and emotional cue with more depth and complexity than is socially expected or socially sustainable. Their capacity for abstract thought can also serve as both a gift and a barrier. INFJs tend to live conceptually, which means they often exist in ideas, ideals, philosophical frameworks, or emotional narratives more than in concrete, present-moment experience. This orientation can detach them from the body and from linear time, making it difficult to stay grounded in practical life. Day-to-day tasks can feel painfully irrelevant or spiritually dissonant, especially when those tasks demand efficiency over authenticity or quantity over quality. This struggle with basic life structure is not laziness or flakiness. It's the product of a nervous system geared toward depth, meaning, and coherence rather than task management or sensory immediacy. It's no surprise, then, that many INFJs resonate with descriptions of executive dysfunction, even if they wouldn't be formally diagnosed with ADHD or autism. Another neurodivergent trait often reported by INFJs is emotional synesthesia, not necessarily in the classic neurological sense, but in the blending of sensory or emotional impressions into intuitive knowing. They might describe sensing someone's emotional pain as a weight in their own chest, or interpreting a social atmosphere in colors, textures, or bodily sensations. This cross-wiring of sensory-emotional data is rarely understood by others and can make INFJs feel alienated even in close relationships. Trying to explain that you just know something, or that a person feels red or tastes sharp, doesn't translate well in a neurotypical discourse. These sensory-emotional interpretations are dismissed as irrational or overly imaginative, further alienating the INFJ from their environment and convincing them to suppress their natural modes of understanding. Many INFJs describe moments of deep existential grief, not tied to any specific event, but to the chronic awareness that something essential is missing from the world. They are often deeply affected by global suffering, ecological destruction, social injustice, and moral hypocrisy. These things don't just upset them, they wound them at a soul level. This kind of sensitivity to systemic and existential pain can mirror the affective burden carried by neurodivergent empaths, autistic activists, and highly idealistic thinkers who feel overwhelmed by the discrepancy between how things are and how they could or should be. For INFJs, the world's failings are not abstract. They are personal, intimate, and internalized. This often results in a drive toward healing professions, social reform, or creative expression, but just as often, it leads to emotional burnout and a desire to retreat permanently from human interaction. Many INFJs don't just use language, they live inside it. They craft internal monologues, fictional characters, dialogues with imagined people, or symbolic interpretations of real events in order to make sense of their experience. Language becomes a bridge between their vast inner world and the external realm, but it's a fragile bridge, easily distorted or misunderstood. INFJs often speak metaphorically, philosophically, or indirectly, which can cause friction in direct, literalist cultures. They may be told they are vague, evasive, or overthinking, when in reality they are engaging with a multidimensional map of meaning that others simply can't see. INFJs frequently find themselves in what might be called identity liminality. They are too intuitive for the rationalists, too emotional for the intellectuals, too spiritual for the skeptics, too idealistic for the pragmatists, too complex for the casual, too quiet for the loud, too intense for the indifferent. They often exist in between roles, ideologies, or communities, never quite fitting anywhere, and yet profoundly capable of understanding everyone. This in-betweenness is not indecision. It is the natural state of someone whose mind refuses to collapse into binaries. It's the stance of someone neurodivergent, not fixed in identity, but fluid across cognitive dimensions that society has not yet learned to name or value. To call INFJs neurodivergent is not to box them in, but to finally give voice to the many ways they diverge from the norm, not as a dysfunction, but as a different kind of genius. Their challenges are real, and so is their potential. But until society expands its definition of what constitutes a normal mind, INFJs will continue to walk the margins, quietly holding a mirror up to a world that doesn't yet know how to see them. Check out our newly released INFJ Mastery course and INFJ ebook. The links are in the description of this video.